The fork clattered against my plate as Patricia Whitmore's voice cut through the dining room like a blade. "I saw you with him, Rebecca. Don't you dare sit there and lie to my face." 23 pairs of eyes turned toward me at the Thanksgiving table, and in that moment, I knew my marriage was about to implode unless I could prove what really happened that Tuesday afternoon. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole nightmare started 3 weeks earlier when I decided to surprise my husband Marcus with his favorite lasagna for our 5th wedding anniversary. I'd taken the afternoon off from my marketing job at Henderson & Associates, stopped by Whole Foods for fresh basil and San Marzano tomatoes, and was heading home when my phone buzzed with a text from Jake Morrison. "Emergency at the downtown office. Can you meet me at Cafe Luna at 2 p.m.? The Peterson account is falling apart." Jake was my business partner in a small consulting firm we'd started on the side. We'd been friends since college, and Marcus knew about our professional relationship. At least, I thought he did. What I didn't realize was that Patricia Whitmore had been driving through downtown that same afternoon, returning from her weekly bridge club at the Riverside Country Club. I arrived at Cafe Luna 15 minutes early and grabbed a corner table near the window. The place was nearly empty except for a young mother with twin toddlers and an elderly man reading a newspaper. Jake rushed in looking frazzled, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his tie loosened. He'd been dealing with client emergencies all week, and it showed. "Rebecca, thank God you're here," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Peterson's threatening to pull the entire contract. Apparently, their board thinks our marketing strategy is too aggressive." We spent the next hour dissecting every aspect of the Peterson proposal. Jake pulled out his laptop and we huddled over spreadsheets and presentation slides, occasionally reaching across each other to point at specific data points. At one point, when he was explaining a complex demographic breakdown, he leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same cedar and bergamot scent he'd worn since freshman year at Northwestern. "Look at this conversion rate," he said, his finger tracing a line on the screen. "If we can show them how the initial spike translates to long-term customer retention, they'll have to see the value." I nodded, pulling my own notebook closer. "What if we restructure the timeline? Give them smaller milestones in the first quarter so they can see immediate results?" That's when Jake's hand briefly touched mine as we both reached for the pen I'd set on the table. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, completely innocent, but I pulled back instinctively. Not because anything inappropriate was happening, but because I had learned over the years that even the appearance of impropriety could cause problems in business relationships. What I didn't know was that Patricia Whitmore had been driving through her silver Mercedes in the parking lot outside, having stopped to take a phone call from her sister in Phoenix. From her angle, she had a clear view through the cafe's large front window. She watched as Jake and I leaned over the laptop, saw our heads close together as we studied the presentation, and witnessed that brief moment when our hands touched. After we finished reviewing the Peterson materials, Jake insisted on walking me to my car. "I really appreciate you dropping everything for this," he said, giving me a quick, platonic hug goodbye, the same casual embrace he'd given me hundreds of times over the years. Marcus is lucky to have someone who's so dedicated to her work. I laughed. "Tell him that when I'm working late again next week." The drive home took longer than usual due to construction on Maple Street, and by the time I walked through our front door, Marcus was already in the kitchen starting dinner. He looked up from the stove with a smile that made my heart skip the way it had since we first met at a mutual friend's barbecue 6 years ago. "How was the Peterson crisis?" he asked, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Jake sounded pretty stressed when he called." "Wait, he called you?" I asked, surprised. "When?" "About an hour ago. He wanted to make sure you knew you were helping him with a client emergency and that you might be late. Said he didn't want me to worry." Marcus kissed my forehead. I told him he was being paranoid, but I appreciated the heads up. I felt a warm surge of gratitude toward Jake for thinking to call Marcus. It was exactly the kind of considerate gesture that had made our business partnership work so well over the past 2 years. We'd always been transparent about our collaboration, and Marcus had never expressed any concerns about our professional relationship. Over dinner, I told Marcus about the Peterson situation, and he offered helpful suggestions for salvaging the account. His background in finance gave him a different perspective on client relations, and by the end of our conversation, I had 3 new strategies to propose to Jake the following day. "You know what?" Marcus said, refilling my wine glass. "Why don't you invite Jake and Sarah over for dinner this weekend? We haven't seen them since Sarah's promotion party last month." I agreed, already mentally planning a menu that would accommodate Sarah's vegetarian preferences. Jake's wife had recently been promoted to senior editor at the City magazine, and we'd been meaning to celebrate properly. The next morning, I called Jake with Marcus' suggestions for the Peterson account, and by noon, we had a revised proposal that addressed all of the board's concerns. Jake was so relieved that he sent flowers to my office, a professional arrangement of white lilies with a note that read, "Thank you for saving my sanity, Jay." My assistant, Carmen, whistled when the delivery arrived. "Someone's grateful," she said with a knowing smile. "It's from my business partner," I explained. "We rescued a major client yesterday." "Lucky business partner," Carmen replied, but I could tell she didn't think anything unusual about the gesture. Jake had sent flowers to the office before, always for professional reasons. When we landed our first major client, when I covered for him during his father's surgery, when we celebrated our second year in business. The weekend dinner with Jake and Sarah went beautifully. Sarah regaled us with stories from the magazine world, and Jake and Marcus spent an hour debating the merits of different investment strategies. As I watched my husband and my business partner laughing over Sarah's impression of their pretentious boss, I felt grateful for how seamlessly our personal and professional relationships had blended. What I couldn't have predicted was how Patricia Whitmore would interpret what she'd witnessed at Cafe Luna. Over the following weeks, she began paying closer attention to my schedule, asking Marcus pointed questions about my work habits and making subtle comments about how much time I seemed to be spending away from home. "Rebecca works such long hours," she mentioned during a casual phone call with Marcus. "I hope she's not burning herself out." She's building something amazing with Jake. Their client list has tripled in the past year. But Patricia's tone suggested she wasn't convinced that work was my only motivation. She'd already constructed an entire narrative in her mind based on that single afternoon at the cafe. And every innocent detail, Jake's phone call to Marcus, the flowers, our dinner invitation, only seemed to confirm her suspicions. The situation escalated 2 weeks later when Patricia volunteered to help me plan Marcus's surprise birthday party. We met at my house on a Thursday afternoon to go over catering options and guest lists. I'd just finished showing her the menu when Jake called about a scheduling conflict with one of our clients. "I'm so sorry, but I have to take this," I told Patricia, stepping into the kitchen for privacy. The call lasted maybe 5 minutes, but when I returned to the living room, Patricia was studying our family photos with an expression I couldn't quite read. Her gaze lingered on a picture from last year's company holiday party. Marcus, Jake, Sarah, and me laughing at something off camera. "Jake seems very involved in your life," she said carefully. "I'm his business partner," I replied, confused by her tone. "We work together almost every day." "Of course," Patricia nodded, but something in her voice suggested she didn't believe me. As Thanksgiving approached, I noticed Patricia becoming increasingly cool toward me during family gatherings. She'd make subtle comments about trust and commitment, always directed at the room in general, but clearly aimed at me. Marcus seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, chatting easily with his mother about work and weekend plans. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, Jake and I had our final meeting to prepare for a major presentation the following week. We met at the same Cafe Luna where our crisis meeting had taken place weeks earlier, simply because it was convenient to both our offices and had reliable Wi-Fi. This time, we sat at a different table, one further from the window, and focused entirely on our presentation materials. The meeting was strictly business, reviewing slides, rehearsing our talking points, and coordinating our roles for the client pitch. We worked efficiently, finishing in under an hour. As we packed up our materials, Jake mentioned that Sarah was cooking for Thanksgiving for the first time and was nervous about timing the turkey. I laughed and shared some tips I'd learned from my own early cooking disasters. It was the kind of casual, friendly conversation we'd had countless times over the years. What I couldn't realize was that Patricia Whitmore had been driving past the cafe again, this time returning from a dental appointment. She saw us through the window once more, our heads bent over our laptops, and our professional collaboration looking suspiciously intimate from her distant perspective. By the time I arrived at the Whitmore family Thanksgiving dinner 3 days later, Patricia had apparently decided that she'd gathered enough evidence to confront me publicly.
The dining room was packed with Marcus's extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents who'd driven in from 3 different states. I'd been looking forward to the gathering, having spent the morning helping Marcus's Aunt Carol prepare her famous sweet potato casserole and listening to his grandfather's stories. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Thanksgiving dinners during the war. The atmosphere was warm and festive, filled with the comfortable chaos of a large family celebration. We'd made it through the turkey and stuffing, through the traditional round of sharing what we were grateful for, and had just started on dessert when Patricia Whitmore cleared her throat and stood up from her chair at the head of the table. "Before we finish our meal," she began, her voice carrying the authority of a woman accustomed to commanding attention, "I think there's something this family needs to discuss." The silence that followed Patricia's announcement was deafening. 23 family members sat frozen, forks halfway to mouths, as if someone had pressed pause on the entire scene. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the distant hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen, even the subtle creak of Uncle Raymond shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Marcus looked genuinely confused, his eyebrows furrowed as he glanced between his mother and me. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles had turned white. She'd clearly rehearsed this moment, probably multiple times in her head, and now that she had everyone's attention, she seemed determined to deliver her accusation with maximum dramatic impact. "3 weeks ago, I saw your wife at Cafe Luna," she began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of righteous indignation. "She was there with a man who was not you, Marcus. They were sitting very close together, whispering, touching hands. It was intimate." The word intimate hung in the air like poison gas. I felt my cheeks burn with a combination of embarrassment and anger. Around the table, Marcus's family members exchanged glances, some curious, others uncomfortable, a few openly skeptical. "Mom," Marcus said slowly, turning to face me directly, "Rebecca, is this true? The flowers?" "Yes, but—" I started, but Patricia cut me off. "There's more," she continued, her voice gaining strength from what she perceived as my admission of guilt. "The phone calls, the late meetings, the way she lights up when she mentions his name. I've been watching Marcus, and I know what I've seen." Uncle Daniel, who'd been quietly nursing his 3rd glass of wine, suddenly spoke up. "Patricia, this sounds like a lot of speculation to me." But Marcus's youngest sister, Ashley, was nodding along with her mother's accusations. Ashley had never particularly liked me, something I had attributed to natural protective instincts toward her older brother. Now she saw an opportunity to validate her instincts. "I always thought something seemed off," Ashley said, her voice carrying false sympathy. "The way Rebecca talks about this Jake person, it's different from how she talks about other colleagues." I felt the walls closing in. Every innocent detail of my professional relationship with Jake was being twisted into evidence of an affair that never happened. The collaborative energy Jake and I brought to our work, the mutual respect we'd built over years of successful partnerships, even our comfortable friendship, all of it was being reframed as romantic deception. "This is insane," I said, my voice louder than I had intended. "Jake is my business partner. His wife Sarah was just here for dinner 2 weeks ago. Marcus was there. Patricia was there." "Appearances can be deceiving," Patricia replied smoothly. "Unfaithful people often go to great lengths to maintain their cover stories." The phrase "unfaithful people" hit me like a slap. In Patricia's mind, I'd already been tried and convicted. This wasn't an accusation seeking truth, it was a verdict being delivered. Marcus's grandfather, a man in his 80s who rarely spoke during family gatherings, suddenly cleared his throat. "In my day," he said in his gravelly voice, "we didn't air our dirty laundry at the dinner table." But his intervention only seemed to embolden Patricia. In your day, Grandpa, wives didn't have business partners. They met in dark corners of coffee shops. The characterization of our professional meetings as clandestine encounters in dark corners would have been laughable if it weren't so destructive. Cafe Luna was one of the most popular
Lunch spots in downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and an open floor plan. If we'd been trying to hide something, it would have been the worst possible location for secret meetings. Marcus's Aunt Carol, who'd been unusually quiet throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Patricia, honey, maybe we should discuss this privately. This is a family dinner, and there are children present." She gestured toward Marcus's 8-year-old nephew, Tommy, who was sitting wide-eyed and clearly absorbing every word of the adult drama unfolding around him. But Patricia shook her head firmly. "This affects the whole family, Carol. Everyone deserves to know what kind of person Marcus married." The phrase cut deeper than any of her previous accusations. What kind of person Marcus married? As if my character, my integrity, my 5 years of marriage to her son could be summarized by her misinterpretation of innocent professional interactions. I could see Marcus struggling to process everything his mother was saying. He knew me, knew my work schedule, knew about my partnership with Jake, but his mother's confidence, her detailed observations, the specific dates and locations, it was clearly shaking his certainty. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything going on between you and Jake that I should know about?" The question felt like a betrayal, even though I understood why he had to ask it. After Patricia's public accusations, his entire family was watching, waiting for my response. His failure to immediately defend me hurt more than I wanted to admit. "Marcus," I said, meeting his eyes directly, "there is absolutely nothing romantic or inappropriate happening between Jake and me. We are business partners and friends, nothing more. I love you, and I would never cheat on you." But even as I spoke the words, I could see doubt flickering in his expression. Patricia's systematic presentation of evidence was designed to plant exactly this kind of uncertainty. Ashley leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk. "Well, that's exactly what someone having an affair would say, isn't it?" Her comment sparked a new wave of murmurs around the table. I looked around at faces I'd known for 5 years, people who'd welcomed me into their family, who'd celebrated my wedding to Marcus, who'd included me in birthday parties and holiday traditions. Now they were looking at me like I was a stranger, someone capable of deception and betrayal. Marcus's Uncle Raymond, who'd always been kind to me, seemed genuinely torn. "Rebecca, I'm not saying I believe this, but maybe you could help us understand these meetings Patricia saw." I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts coherently, despite the surreal nature of defending my professional conduct at a family dinner. The first meeting was about the Peterson account, a major client who was threatening to cancel their contract. Jake called both Marcus and me that afternoon. Marcus can confirm that. Marcus did call me. He said there was a client emergency and that Rebecca was helping him handle it. And the second meeting was to prepare for our presentation this week. We're pitching to Davidson Industries on Monday. It's the biggest potential contract our firm has ever pursued. The details sounded reasonable, professional, exactly what they were. But Patricia had already poisoned the well with her accusations, and I could see family members weighing my explanations against her supposed eyewitness testimony. Jennifer, the lawyer's cousin, spoke up again. "But Patricia, you said you saw them touching hands. That seems like more than just business." I felt heat rising in my cheeks again. Jake and I were both reaching for the same pen. Our hands touched for maybe 2 seconds. It was completely accidental and completely innocent. "That's a very convenient explanation," Ashley muttered. "It's the truth," I said firmly. Marcus's mother wasn't finished building her case. "Tell them about the hug, Rebecca, the intimate embrace in the parking lot." The way she described Jake's casual goodbye hug made it sound like we'd been locked in a passionate embrace. I could practically see her crafting this narrative in her mind, transforming every innocent gesture into evidence of an illicit affair.
He hugged me goodbye, the same way he's hugged me hundreds of times over the past 6 years, the same way he hugged Marcus at our wedding, the same way he hugged you, Patricia, at your birthday party last year. But my logical explanations weren't penetrating the emotional atmosphere Patricia had created. She'd successfully cast doubt on my character, and doubt, once planted, was remarkably difficult to uproot. Marcus was staring at his hands, clearly struggling with the conflicting narratives. His mother, whom he trusted implicitly, was presenting what seemed like compelling evidence of my infidelity. His wife, whom he loved, was denying everything and offering reasonable explanations, but reasonable explanations could also be carefully constructed alibis.
The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Conversations had stopped entirely. Dessert plates sat untouched, and the warm family atmosphere that had characterized the earlier part of the evening had evaporated completely. Finally, Marcus's father, who'd remained silent throughout the entire confrontation, stood up from his chair. "I think," he said in his measured, diplomatic voice, "that this conversation has gone far enough for tonight." But Patricia wasn't ready to let her moment of triumph slip away. "Harold, your son deserves to know the truth about his wife." "What your son deserves," Harold replied firmly, "is to have this discussion in private, away from the entire family. This is between Marcus and Rebecca." I felt a surge of gratitude toward my father-in-law, but I could also see that the damage was already done. The accusation had been made publicly, in front of 23 family members, and no amount of private discussion could undo the spectacle. Tommy, the 8-year-old nephew, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why is everyone mad at Aunt Rebecca?" The innocent question highlighted just how inappropriate the entire confrontation had been, but it also crystallized something important. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was defending my place in this family, my relationship with Marcus, and my reputation among people who mattered to me. "I'm not mad at Aunt Rebecca," his mother whispered, but her uncertainty was obvious. But Patricia had found her rallying cry in the child's question. "Because sometimes," she said, looking directly at me, "people aren't who they pretend to be." The drive home from the Whitmore family dinner was the longest 27 minutes of my life. Marcus gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his jaw clenched in a way I hadn't seen since his father had heart surgery 3 years ago. The silence between us felt like a living thing, growing heavier with each mile we traveled away from his family's house. I stared out the passenger window at the familiar suburban streets, decorated with leftover Halloween pumpkins and early Christmas lights, and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of 30 minutes, I'd gone from being a beloved daughter-in-law sharing Thanksgiving dinner to being publicly accused of adultery in front of my Marcus's entire extended family. When we finally pulled into our driveway, Marcus sat motionless in the driver's seat for a long moment before turning off the engine. The sudden quiet felt ominous. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carefully controlled in a way that scared me more than if he'd been shouting. Inside our house, the familiar surroundings felt strange and uncomfortable. The framed photos of our wedding, our anniversary trips, our life together seemed to mock the accusations that were now hanging over us. Marcus walked straight to the living room and sat heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair. "I need you to tell me everything," he said, without looking at me. "Every detail about your relationship with Jake. Every meeting, every phone call, every interaction. I need to understand what my mother saw." The word relationship stung. Marcus and I had always been completely transparent with each other about our friendships and professional associations. The fact that he was now questioning the foundation of trust we'd built over 6 years felt like a fundamental shift in our marriage. I sat down across from him, maintaining eye contact even though his expression was guarded and distant. "Marcus, you know Jake. You've known him almost as long as I have. You were in our wedding party. You've seen how he interacts with Sarah, how happy they are together. The idea that he would jeopardize his marriage or that I would jeopardize ours is completely absurd." "But my mother saw what she saw," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting he was trying to balance his trust in me with his loyalty to Patricia.
I felt a flash of anger at his characterization of his mother as non-vindictive. Patricia Whitmore had orchestrated tonight's confrontation with surgical precision, choosing the most public and humiliating possible moment to launch her accusations. That wasn't the behavior of someone seeking truth. It was the behavior of someone seeking to destroy. "She didn't make it up," I said carefully, but she completely misinterpreted what she saw. Let me walk you through exactly what happened at both of those meetings. Over the next hour, I reconstructed every detail I could remember about my encounters with Jake at Cafe Luna. I showed Marcus the text messages Jake had sent about the Peterson emergency, the email chain about the Davidson Industries presentation, even the thank you card that had come with the flowers. I pulled up our business calendar on my phone, showing him how our meetings corresponded with major client deadlines and project milestones. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking questions about timing or specific details. I could see him trying to reconcile his mother's narrative with my explanations, and the conflict was clearly exhausting him. "The thing I don't understand," he said finally, "is why Jake felt the need to call me that first afternoon. If it was just a routine business meeting, why the heads up?" The question revealed how deeply Patricia's accusations had shaken his confidence in me. In our 5 years of marriage, Marcus had never questioned Jake's consideration or my professional judgment. Now he was analyzing our business partner's courtesy as potential evidence of guilt. "Jake called you because he's thoughtful," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "Because he knew the meeting would run late and he didn't want you to worry about where I was. Because he respects our marriage and wanted to be transparent about asking me to work after hours." But even as I spoke, I could see that my explanations weren't fully convincing Marcus. The doubt Patricia had planted was taking root, creating questions where none had existed before. The next morning, I woke up to find Marcus already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept much, and when I tried to kiss him good morning, he turned his head so my lips caught his cheek instead of his mouth. "I've been thinking about this all night," he said without preamble. "I want to believe you, Rebecca, I really do. But I need some kind of proof that what you're telling me is the truth." The word proof hit me like a physical blow. After 6 years together, after building a life and a marriage based on trust and open communication, my husband was asking me to prove my fidelity like I was a defendant in a criminal trial. "What kind of proof?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus closed his laptop and looked at me directly for the first time since we'd gotten home. "I don't know. Maybe we could call Jake together or talk to Sarah, someone who can verify your story." The suggestion that my story needed verification from outside sources was devastating. I realized that Patricia's accusations had fundamentally changed how Marcus saw me. I was no longer his wife and partner. I was a suspect whose claims required corroboration. "Fine," I said, anger finally overriding hurt. "Let's call Jake right now. Let's call Sarah. Let's call anyone you need to convince you that your wife isn't a cheater." But Marcus shook his head. "It's Thanksgiving weekend. I can't drag them into this mess right now." The irony wasn't lost on me. His mother had been perfectly willing to drag me into this mess in front of 23 family members, but he was concerned about bothering our friends with a phone call that could clear up the entire misunderstanding. I spent the rest of Friday in a state of emotional limbo. Marcus went to play golf with his brother, claiming he needed time to think. I considered calling my own family, but the thought of explaining the situation was too humiliating. Instead, I cleaned the house obsessively, reorganized closets, and tried to distract myself from the surreal reality that my marriage was in crisis because of my mother-in-law's paranoid misinterpretations. That evening, Jake texted me about the Davidson Industries presentation scheduled for Monday morning. "Ready to knock this out of the park?" his message read, followed by a thumbs-up emoji. Under normal circumstances, I would have responded enthusiastically, maybe suggesting we grab coffee Sunday afternoon to do a final rehearsal. Instead, I stared at the text for 10 minutes, paralyzed by the knowledge that any interaction with Jake could be twisted into further evidence against me. When Marcus returned from golf, I showed him Jake's text message. "This is what our communication looks like. Professional, focused on work, completely appropriate." Marcus read the message multiple times, as if searching for hidden meaning in Jake's casual enthusiasm. "Has he texted you since Thursday?" he asked. "No," I replied. "And before you ask, I haven't texted him either. Our last communication before this was Wednesday afternoon, finalizing the details for Monday's presentation." But instead of reassuring Marcus, my explanations seemed to raise new questions in his mind. "Don't you think it's strange that he hasn't checked in since then? If you're such close business partners, wouldn't he want to know how your Thanksgiving went?" I realized with growing horror that Marcus was now analyzing the absence of communication as suspicious as he'd previously found the presence of communication. In his current state of mind, anything Jake did or didn't do could be interpreted as evidence of our supposed affair. Saturday brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah Morrison rang our doorbell at 10 in the morning, holding a bottle of wine and wearing a concerned expression. "Jake told me about the client emergency last week," she said as I invited her in. "I brought this to celebrate landing the Peterson account." Marcus appeared in the living room doorway, and I watched his face carefully as Sarah chatted easily about her husband's relief at saving the client relationship, her casual mention of Jake's stress levels, her obvious pride in his professional success, her complete lack of suspicion about his business partnership with me. All of it should have been reassuring evidence of my innocence. Instead, I could see Marcus studying Sarah's demeanor, perhaps wondering if she was naive about her husband's activities or if she was somehow complicit in covering up our supposed affair.
"Sarah," Marcus said suddenly, "can I ask you something? Do you ever worry about Jake working so closely with Rebecca?" The question was so direct and inappropriate that I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Sarah looked genuinely confused by the inquiry. "Worry?" she repeated. "About what? Rebecca's the best business partner Jake's ever had. Their company has been incredibly successful, and Jake comes home energized by their projects. Why would I worry about that?" Her genuine bewilderment should have settled the matter, but Marcus pressed on. "I mean, they spend a lot of time together. Late meetings, client dinners, weekend work sessions." "Marcus, what's this about?" Sarah asked, her confusion deepening. "Has something happened?" I found myself in the impossible position of either lying to my friend or explaining that my mother-in-law had accused me of having an affair with her husband. Both options felt equally humiliating. It's nothing," I said quickly. "Marcus's mother she saw Jake and me at a cafe and got the wrong impression about something." Sarah's confusion transformed into something closer to shock. "The wrong impression? About what?" "She thinks we're having an affair," I said bluntly, unable to find a gentler way to phrase Patricia's accusations. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, then looked at Marcus, then back at me. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of incredulous anger. "Are you serious? Someone actually thinks Jake and Rebecca are having an affair?" Her reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for: immediate, visceral disbelief at the absurdity of the accusation. But when I glanced at Marcus, I could see that even Sarah's obvious shock wasn't entirely convincing him. "I know it sounds crazy," Marcus said defensively, "but my mother saw them together twice, and their behavior seemed intimate." Sarah's expression shifted from shock to something approaching fury. "Marcus, I've been married to Jake for 4 years. I know what he looks like when he's attracted to someone, and I know what he looks like when he's focused on work. The idea that he would risk our marriage, his business, and his friendship with both of you for some secret affair is not just wrong, it's insulting to everyone involved." Her passionate defense of both Jake's character and my integrity should have ended the conversation. Instead, Marcus asked the question that revealed just how deeply Patricia's poison had affected his thinking. "But how can you be completely certain? How can anyone ever be completely certain about what their spouse does when they're not around?" Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, hurt, and finally, determination.
She set down her wine bottle with more force than necessary and turned to face Marcus directly. "You want to know how I can be certain? Because I trust my husband. Because trust is the foundation of marriage. And because the alternative, living in constant suspicion and paranoia, would destroy any relationship." But Marcus wasn't backing down. Trust is important, but so is being realistic about human nature. People have affairs. It happens every day. "Not Jake," Sarah replied firmly, "and definitely not Rebecca. Have you lost your mind, Marcus?" Watching my friend defend me with such conviction while my own husband questioned my fidelity was surreal. Sarah knew both Jake and me well enough to find the accusations ridiculous. Yet Marcus, who lived with me, shared a bed with me, knew my daily routines and habits, was entertaining the possibility that I was leading a double life. "I haven't lost my mind," Marcus said defensively. "I'm trying to process what my mother told me. She's not a liar, Sarah. She saw what she saw." Then she saw two business partners having a work meeting, which is exactly what Rebecca has been telling you all along. The argument continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah growing increasingly frustrated at Marcus's refusal to accept the obvious explanation for his mother's observations. Finally, she stood up to leave, her patience clearly exhausted. "Marcus, if you destroy your marriage over this paranoid nonsense, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Rebecca is one of the most honest, loyal people I know. If you can't see that, you don't deserve her." After Sarah left, the tension between Marcus and I reached a new level. Her passionate defense of my character seemed to have the opposite effect on Marcus than what I'd hoped. Instead of reassuring him, it made him wonder if Sarah was naive, if she was being deceived just as he potentially was. Sunday night, as we prepared for the Davidson Industries presentation the next morning, Marcus watched me rehearse my talking points with obvious discomfort. Every mention of
Jake's name, every reference to our collaborative strategy, seemed to reinforce his growing paranoia about our partnership. "Maybe you should let Jake handle this presentation alone," he suggested as I practiced my closing remarks. "Given everything that's happened, it might be better to step back from working so closely with him." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. The Davidson Industries contract represented months of preparation and potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue for our consulting firm. Marcus was essentially asking me to sabotage my own business to appease his mother's delusions. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I'm not going to destroy my professional reputation because your mother misunderstood what she saw at a coffee shop." "It's not just about my mother anymore," Marcus replied. "It's about us, our marriage. If working with Jake is causing problems between us, maybe it's time to reconsider the partnership." I stared at him in disbelief. "Marcus, Jake and I have built something amazing together. Our client satisfaction rate is 97%. We've tripled our revenue in 2 years. You're asking me to throw all of that away based on your mother's paranoid conspiracy theory?" "I'm asking you to prioritize our marriage," he said quietly. "I am prioritizing our marriage," I replied, my voice rising, "by defending myself against false accusations and refusing to be bullied into making career-destroying decisions." That night, Marcus slept in the guest bedroom for the first time in our 5-year marriage. As I lay alone in our king-size bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that Patricia's accusations had accomplished exactly what she'd intended. They were tearing my marriage apart from the inside. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. The Davidson Industries presentation was scheduled for 10 o'clock at their downtown headquarters, and despite everything happening in my personal life, I was determined to deliver the performance our company needed. Jake met me in the lobby of the Davidson building, looking professional and confident in his navy suit. If he noticed my subdued demeanor, he didn't comment on it, instead focusing on last-minute preparation details. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. The presentation went flawlessly.
Jake and I had worked together so long that we could anticipate each other's transitions, build on each other's points, and present a unified front that impressed the Davidson executives. Our collaborative chemistry, which had become a source of suspicion and paranoia at home, was exactly what made us effective in professional settings. After we finished, the Davidson team asked for 15 minutes to deliberate. Jake and I waited in a conference room down the hall, reviewing our performance and discussing potential follow-up questions. "I think that went really well," Jake said, loosening his tie slightly. "The way you handled their questions about implementation timelines was perfect." "Thanks," I replied, but my heart wasn't fully in the celebration. Even this moment of professional triumph felt tainted by the accusations hanging over my personal life. "Rebecca, is everything okay?" Jake asked, studying my face with concern. "You seem distracted today." I hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. The truth was that explaining Patricia's accusations would be humiliating and potentially damaging to our business relationship. But Jake had been my partner and friend for years. He deserved to know why I'd been acting strangely. "Actually," I said slowly, "there's something I need to tell you. It's about the meetings we had at Cafe Luna." Jake's eyebrows furrowed with confusion. "What about them?" "Marcus's mother saw us there, both times. She thinks we're having an affair." The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning system and the distant sound of traffic 15 floors below. Jake stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through disbelief, shock, and finally, anger. "She thinks, what?" he said, his voice barely controlled. "She confronted me at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of Marcus's entire family. She said our meetings looked intimate, that we were touching hands, and that the flowers you sent to my office were evidence of a romantic relationship." Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from times when he was deeply stressed. "Rebecca, this is insane. Does Marcus believe her?" "I don't know," I admitted. "He says he wants to trust me, but he's asking for proof. He's questioning everything about our partnership, even suggesting I should step back from working with you." He ran his hands through his hair again, this time his eyes steely. "Rebecca, I've known you for 7 years. We're not more than business partners and friends." "I know that, Jake," I said. "But that's not what Marcus's mother saw. She's convinced that we're having an affair. She said our meetings looked intimate, that we were touching hands, and that the flowers you sent to my office were evidence of a romantic relationship. Marcus's mother wants me to resign from this." "I know that, Jake," I said, "but that's not what Marcus's mother saw. She's convinced that we're having an affair." "Jake, we've known each other for a long time. I'm no kind of cheater."
"This is a disaster," Jake said, pacing the small conference room. "If word gets out about these accusations, it could destroy both of our reputations. Our clients hire us because they trust our professionalism. I hadn't fully considered the business implications of Patricia's accusations until Jake voiced them. If rumors spread that we were having an affair, it could undermine client confidence in our judgment and ethics. The company we'd worked so hard to build could be destroyed by gossip and innuendo. What are we going to do?" I asked. Before Jake could answer, a knock on the conference room door interrupted our conversation. The Davidson Industries CEO, Margaret Chen, entered with a smile that immediately lifted my spirits. "Congratulations," she said, extending her hand to both of us. "We'd like to move forward with your proposal. When can you start?" The next few minutes were a blur of handshakes, contract discussions, and scheduling details. Landing the Davidson account was the biggest success in our company's history, but I could barely focus on the celebration. All I could think about was how to prove to Marcus that this professional triumph was based on legitimate business acumen, not romantic deception. After we left the Davidson building, Jake suggested we grab lunch to celebrate and discuss next steps for the project. Under normal circumstances, I would have agreed immediately. But the thought of being seen with Jake at another restaurant, of potentially providing more evidence for Patricia's conspiracy theory, made me hesitate. "Maybe we should just head back to our respective offices," I said. "We can discuss the project details over email." Jake stopped walking and turned to face me on the sidewalk. Rebecca, we can't let this accusation change how we do business. If we start avoiding each other or acting suspicious, it will only make things worse. He was right, but I felt trapped between protecting my marriage and maintaining my professional life. Every decision seemed to carry the potential for misinterpretation. I know, but Marcus is already questioning our partnership. If someone sees us celebrating together and reports back to his mother, then let them see us, Jake said firmly. We landed a major client through hard work and professional excellence. We have every right to celebrate that achievement. His confidence was reassuring, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into another trap. Still, Jake was my business partner, and we did have legitimate reasons to discuss the Davidson project. We ended up at Romano's Bistro, an upscale restaurant 3 blocks from the Davidson building. As we reviewed the contract details over pasta and wine, I found myself relaxing for the first time in days. This was exactly what our business relationship had always been: collaborative, respectful, focused on shared professional goals. You know what we should do, Jake said as we finished our meal? We should invite Marcus and Sarah to dinner this weekend. Let them see us together as couples, the way we've always been. Maybe that will help Marcus understand that nothing has changed. The suggestion was well-intentioned, but I knew that Marcus was in no mood for social gatherings with Jake. In his current state of mind, any interaction between us would be scrutinized for signs of impropriety. I don't think Marcus is ready for that, I said diplomatically. Jake's expression grew serious. Rebecca, how bad is this situation? Are you and Marcus going to be okay? The question forced me to confront a possibility I'd been avoiding. I don't know, I admitted. He slipped in the guest room last night. This morning he barely said goodbye when I left for the presentation. It feels like he's already decided I'm guilty. There has to be something we can do, some way to prove that these accusations are baseless. As he spoke, I noticed a familiar silver Mercedes pulling into the restaurant's parking lot. My stomach dropped when I recognized the driver, Patricia Whitmore. She parked directly across from the restaurant's large front windows, which provided a perfect view of our table. Jake, don't turn around, but Patricia is in the parking lot. She's watching us right now. Jake's fork paused halfway to his mouth. You've got to be kidding me. I wish I were. She's sitting in her car and she has a clear view of our table. The irony was devastating. Here we are, celebrating the biggest contract in our company's history, having a completely professional lunch conversation, and Patricia is probably interpreting our business meal as another romantic rendezvous. What are we going to do? Jake asked. I considered our options. We could leave immediately, but that might look like we were fleeing because we had something to hide. We could stay and finish our meal, but every moment we remained visible would provide more ammunition for Patricia's accusations. Let's just act normal, I decided. We're 2 business partners having a celebratory lunch after landing a major client. There's nothing inappropriate about that. But even as I spoke the words, I knew that Patricia wouldn't see it that way. In her mind, she'd just caught us in another secret meeting, more evidence of our supposed affair. The fact that we were at an upscale restaurant during the lunch hour, in full view of dozens of other diners, wouldn't matter to her interpretation of events. Patricia's silver Mercedes remained in the parking lot for exactly 37 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my phone with growing dread as she documented what would surely become the centerpiece of her next accusation. When she finally drove away, I felt no relief, only the sinking certainty that she was racing home to call Marcus with news of our latest rendezvous. Jake and I finished our meal in subdued silence, the celebration of our biggest professional victory completely overshadowed by the knowledge that we'd been surveilled like criminals. As we walked back to our cars, Jake stopped suddenly and turned to face me. This is getting out of hand, Rebecca. Your mother-in-law is stalking us. The word stalking felt extreme, but I couldn't deny that Patricia's behavior had crossed normal boundaries.
following us to restaurants, timing her presence to coincide with our meetings, building detailed files of our interactions. It was the behavior of someone obsessed with proving a predetermined conclusion. I don't know what to do about it, I admitted. If I confront her, she'll just claim she was innocently driving by. If I tell Marcus she's following us, he'll think I'm being paranoid. Maybe we should consider getting a restraining order, Jake suggested. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Can you imagine trying to explain to a judge that I need legal protection from my mother-in-law because she thinks we're having an affair? They'd think I was the crazy one. Jake nodded grimly. This whole situation is insane. We're successful business partners who've never so much as flirted with each other, and somehow we're being treated like we're conducting some torrid affair. As I drove home that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. We need to talk when you get home. It's important. I didn't need to guess what had prompted his message. Patricia had undoubtedly called Marcus within minutes of leaving the restaurant parking lot, breathlessly reporting her latest discovery of Jake and I dining together. I found Marcus waiting in the kitchen, his laptop open, and his expression grimmer than I'd ever seen it. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't ask about the Davidson presentation, didn't acknowledge what should have been a career-defining day for me. My mother called, he said without preamble. She saw you and Jake at Romano's Bistro this afternoon. She said you looked very comfortable together. I set my purse down carefully, trying to control my rising anger. We were celebrating landing the Davidson Industries contract. It's the biggest deal our company has ever closed. Celebrating, Marcus repeated, as if the word tasted bitter. Just the two of you, at a romantic restaurant. Romano's isn't romantic. It's a business lunch spot. Half the tables were occupied by people in suits having work meetings. But Marcus had clearly moved beyond caring about context or reasonable explanations. Rebecca, this is the third time my mother has seen you with Jake in what she considers compromising situations. How many coincidences am I supposed to believe? The question revealed how completely Patricia's campaign had succeeded in poisoning Marcus's perception of reality. What she had witnessed were 3 routine business interactions, a client emergency meeting, a presentation preparation session, and a celebration lunch. But in her narrative, they'd become a pattern of clandestine romantic encounters. They're not coincidences, I said firmly. They're work meetings. Jake and I run a business together. We have to meet with each other to serve our clients effectively. Then why does it bother you so much that my mother saw you? Marcus asked. If everything is innocent, why are you acting so defensive? The question was a perfect example of how false accusations create impossible situations. If I defended myself, I was being defensive. If I remained calm, I was being calculating. If I showed emotion, I was overreacting. If I stayed logical, I was being cold. There was no response that wouldn't be interpreted as evidence of guilt. I said, "It bothers me," slowly, "because your mother is systematically destroying my marriage based on misunderstandings and assumptions. It bothers me because my husband is choosing to believe her conspiracy theories instead of trusting the woman he married."
Marcus closed his laptop and finally looked at me directly. I want to trust you, Rebecca, but you have to understand how this looks from my perspective. My mother has no reason to lie about what she's seeing. She's not lying, I agreed. She's misinterpreting. There's a difference. Is there? Marcus asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and Jake are going to great lengths to spend time together outside of your office. I felt something snap inside me. After days of patient explanations, reasonable responses, and careful consideration of Marcus's feelings, I'd reached my limit for accommodating his paranoia. You know what, Marcus? You're right. Jake and I do spend time together outside our office. We meet clients at restaurants, we attend industry conferences, we grab coffee to discuss strategy. That's what business partners do. And if you can't accept that basic reality, then maybe the problem isn't my professional relationship with Jake. Maybe the problem is that you've let your mother convince you that I'm someone I'm not. The argument that followed was the worst fight of our marriage.
Marcus accused me of being dismissive of his concerns. I accused him of being manipulated by his mother's jealousy and control issues. He questioned why I couldn't just avoid situations that made him uncomfortable. I pointed out that his discomfort was based on fabricated suspicions, not legitimate concerns. "Fine," Marcus said finally, his voice cold with anger. "If you won't voluntarily step back from working so closely with Jake, maybe you can explain to me why I found this in your email." He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. Displayed was an email from Jake sent that morning while we were preparing for the Davidson presentation. The subject line read, "Can't wait to see you today." My heart sank as I read the message. Taken out of context, Jake's enthusiasm about our presentation could easily be misinterpreted as romantic anticipation. The email continued, "I've been thinking about our strategy all night. I think we're going to knock them dead with our chemistry." The word chemistry hung in the air between Marcus and me like an accusation. In the context of business, Jake was referring to our collaborative dynamic, our ability to complement each other's strengths during client presentations. But Marcus was clearly interpreting it as evidence of romantic attraction. "You went through my email?" I asked, shocked that our relationship had deteriorated to the point where Marcus felt justified in violating my privacy. "I went through our shared computer," Marcus corrected. "Your email was still open this morning." The distinction felt meaningless. Whether accidental or intentional, Marcus had seen private business correspondence and was now using it as evidence against me. Jake was talking about our presentation chemistry, our ability to work together effectively in client meetings. "You've seen us present before, Marcus. You know how we collaborate." I know what I thought I was seeing. Now I'm wondering if I was being naive. That night, Marcus again slept in the guest room, and I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, and wondering how my life had spiraled so far out of control. 3 weeks ago, I'd been happily married with a thriving business and warm relationships with my in-laws. Now, my marriage was in shambles, my professional reputation was under attack, and I was being treated like a criminal for the crime of being successful in a male-dominated industry. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected development. Jake called me at 7 a.m., his voice tight with concern. "Rebecca, we have a problem. I just got off the phone with the Peterson account. They're questioning whether they want to continue working with our firm." My stomach dropped. "What? Why? We saved their contract just 3 weeks ago." Apparently, someone contacted them with concerns about our professionalism. They wouldn't say who, but they mentioned rumors about our working relationship being inappropriate. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. Patricia's accusations weren't just destroying my marriage, they were now threatening our business and our clients' confidence in our services. "Do you think it was Patricia?" I asked. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Our consulting firm depended on trust and reputation. If word spread that the partners were having an affair, it could destroy everything we'd built.
"We need to figure out how to prove that these accusations are false," I said. "Not just for Marcus, but for our business." "How do we prove a negative?" Jake asked. "How do we prove that nothing inappropriate has ever happened between us?" It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer. We couldn't produce witnesses to our professionalism because most of our interactions had been private business meetings. We couldn't point to our respective happy marriages as evidence because Marcus's faith in our relationship was already shaken, and these rumors could potentially affect Jake and Sarah's marriage as well. "Maybe we should hire a private investigator," I suggested. "Someone who can document our actual activities and prove that we're only meeting for business purposes." "That seems extreme," Jake replied, but I could hear him considering the idea. Although at this point, extreme measures might be necessary. After I hung up with Jake, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and trying to figure out how to salvage both my marriage and my career. The irony wasn't lost on me that the harder I worked to prove my innocence, the more suspicious my behavior appeared to Marcus. Every phone call with Jake, every email exchange, every business meeting was now being interpreted through the lens of Patricia's accusations.
My phone rang, interrupting my brooding. The caller ID showed Marcus's office number. "Hi," I said, hoping his voice would carry some warmth, some indication that he'd reconsidered his position overnight. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about everything, and I've made a decision. I think we should go to couples counseling." The suggestion should have been encouraging, a sign that Marcus wanted to work on our relationship rather than simply ending it. But his tone suggested that he saw counseling as a way to get me to admit to wrongdoing rather than as a path to rebuilding trust. "Okay," I said carefully. "I think that could be helpful. I've already made an appointment for Thursday afternoon. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes. She specializes in infidelity and rebuilding trust after affairs." The phrase "after affairs" hit me like a slap. Marcus had already decided I'd been unfaithful. He was simply looking for professional help in dealing with the aftermath of my supposed betrayal. "Marcus, I haven't had an affair. I've never been unfaithful to you. Going to a counselor who specializes in infidelity recovery suggests you've already decided I'm guilty. I'm trying to save our marriage, Rebecca. I think counseling is our best option at this point." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Marcus's efforts to save our marriage were actually efforts to rehabilitate me after my assumed guilt. He wasn't looking for truth or reconciliation. He was looking for confession and absolution. The next morning, I walked into Cafe Luna with a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. The breakfast crowd was thinning out, leaving mostly laptop-wielding remote workers and a few business people conducting early meetings. I approached the counter where a young barista with purple hair was wiping down the espresso machine. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm hoping to speak with the manager about your security camera system." The barista looked puzzled. "Is there a problem? Did something happen here?" "Not exactly. I need to request footage from a few weeks ago. It's for personal reasons." She called over the manager, a middle-aged man named David, who emerged from the back office with coffee stains on his apron and a slightly hurried expression. When I explained my situation, carefully omitting the most embarrassing details, his demeanor shifted to one of understanding concern. "Oh, you're dealing with a false accusation situation," he said, nodding sympathetically. "We get requests like this more often than you'd think. Cheating spouses, workplace harassment claims, insurance fraud. Unfortunately, we can't just hand over footage to anyone who asks." My heart sank. What would I need to do to get access? Typically, we require a court order or a subpoena. Or, if all parties involved consent in writing, we can sometimes work with that. He paused, studying my face. "How serious is this situation?" "It's destroying my marriage," I said simply. David's expression softened. "Look, I'm not supposed to do this, but I've been married for 22 years. I know how these misunderstandings can spiral out of control. If you can bring in your husband and the other person involved, and everyone consents to viewing the footage together, I might be able to make an exception." Getting Marcus and Jake to agree to view security camera footage together seemed like an impossible task, given the current state of relationships between all parties. But it was the only concrete path I could see forward.
I called Jake first, explaining my plan and the manager's requirements. There was a long pause before he responded. "Rebecca, are you sure this is necessary? Viewing security footage feels like we're treating the situation as if it's actually credible." "Jake, this accusation is destroying my marriage and threatening our business. Our clients are questioning our professionalism. At this point, I need more than logical explanations. I need irrefutable proof." Another pause. "Sarah isn't going to believe this is happening. Will you ask her to come too? The more witnesses we have to the truth, the better." Jake agreed, though I could hear reluctance in his voice. Marcus was a harder sell. When I called him at work and explained my plan, his response was immediate and negative. "This is ridiculous, Rebecca. You want to drag Jake and me to a coffee shop to watch security footage like we're investigating a crime? We are investigating a crime, the crime of false accusation." Marcus, this footage will show exactly what happened at those meetings. No interpretation, no bias, just objective reality. And what if the footage shows something you don't want me to see? The question revealed just how thoroughly Patricia's accusations had poisoned his thinking. He was more prepared to believe I was guilty than innocent, more willing to assume the footage would condemn me than vindicate me. Then our marriage is over, I said bluntly. But Marcus, I'm willing to bet everything on what those cameras recorded because I know the truth. Are you? That afternoon, an unlikely group gathered at Cafe Luna. Marcus and me, Jake and Sarah, and David the manager, who led us to a small back office where the security system was housed. The setup was more sophisticated than I had expected. Multiple cameras covering different angles of the dining area, high-definition recording, and a digital storage system that archived footage for 60 days. "Which dates are we looking at?" David asked, settling in front of the computer. I provided the dates of both meetings Patricia had witnessed. David pulled up the first one, the Peterson emergency meeting from 3 weeks ago. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. as Jake and I entered the cafe, clearly visible on the main camera. Watching the footage was surreal. There we were, two business partners arriving for a client crisis meeting, but I was seeing us through the lens of everything that had happened since. Marcus sat rigidly beside me, his jaw clenched as he watched our recorded selves select a table near the window. The camera angle provided a clear view of our interaction. Jake looked stressed and disheveled as he explained the Peterson situation. I took notes, occasionally pointing at his laptop screen as we reviewed client materials. The brief moment when our hands touched while reaching for the same pen was visible but looked exactly like what it was, an accidental contact that lasted less than 2 seconds. "Stop the video there," Marcus said suddenly. David paused the footage at the moment of hand contact. "What do you see?" I asked Marcus. He said, "I see exactly what you said happened. An accident." Sarah, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Marcus, what did you think you were going to see? Rebecca and Jake making out over spreadsheets?" The question might have been amusing under different circumstances, but the tension in the room was too thick for humor. We continued watching as Jake and I spent the next hour focused entirely on business materials, our body language professional and task-oriented throughout. "Fast forward to when they leave," Marcus instructed. David advanced the footage to show Jake and I packing up our materials and walking toward the exit. The hug goodbye was visible in the parking lot camera, a brief, platonic embrace between colleagues, the same casual contact Jake might share with any professional associate. "Okay," Marcus said quietly. "Let's see the second meeting." David loaded the footage from the more recent date, the presentation preparation session that had taken place the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Again, the cameras captured everything: our arrival, our selection of a different table, our focus on laptop screens and presentation materials. This meeting looked even more obviously professional than the first. We were clearly rehearsing, with Jake occasionally standing to practice his portion of the presentation while I took notes and offered suggestions. There was no intimate conversation, no inappropriate touching, no behavior that could reasonably be interpreted as romantic. "I don't understand," Marcus said, staring at the screen. "This looks completely innocent." Because it was completely innocent. Everything your mother told you was technically accurate. We met, we sat close together, we were focused on each other, but the context she provided was completely wrong.
Jake leaned forward in his chair. "Marcus, this is exactly what our working relationship has always looked like. Professional, collaborative, task-focused. There's never been anything romantic between Rebecca and me." Sarah nodded emphatically. "I've watched Jake work with dozens of colleagues over the years. This is how he acts with everyone: focused, intense, collaborative. If I thought this was romantic behavior, I'd be filing for divorce from every business meeting he's ever attended." David, who had been quietly observing our group dynamics, spoke up. "I've seen a lot of footage requested for marital disputes. Believe me, when people are actually having affairs, it's obvious. They sit differently, they touch differently, they look at each other differently. What I'm seeing here is two people working."
Marcus slumped back in his chair, the weight of realization settling over him. So, my mother was wrong. Completely wrong. Not wrong about what she saw, I clarified. Wrong about what it meant. She saw two business partners having work meetings and interpreted them as romantic encounters because that's what she was looking for. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Marcus had spent weeks questioning his wife's fidelity, damaging his marriage, and creating a crisis that had affected everyone in the room, all based on his mother's misinterpretation of innocent professional interactions. "I owe everyone an apology," Marcus said, finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Especially you, Rebecca. I should have trusted you. I should have believed your explanations instead of entertaining my mother's conspiracy theories." Sarah crossed her arms, her expression stern. "Marcus, you put Rebecca through hell. You questioned her character, her integrity, her fidelity. You made her prove her innocence when she'd done nothing wrong." "I know," Marcus replied miserably. "I don't know how to fix this." Jake, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "The question now is how we move forward. This accusation has affected all of our relationships and potentially our business reputation. We need to figure out how to repair the damage." I looked around the room at these people who had been drawn into Patricia's web of suspicion and manipulation. Marcus, whose trust in me had been shattered by his mother's lies. Jake and Sarah, whose marriage had been questioned and whose professional reputation had been threatened. Even David, who had been kind enough to help us discover the truth. "The first thing we need to do," I said, "is make sure this footage is preserved. I want copies, and I want documentation of when and how it was recorded, because I have a feeling Patricia isn't going to accept the truth easily." David nodded. "I can burn copies to DVD and provide authentication documentation. This system timestamps everything and has built-in safeguards against tampering." "The second thing," I continued, looking directly at Marcus, "is that you need to have a serious conversation with your mother about boundaries. Her behavior over the past few weeks has been completely unacceptable." Marcus nodded, reluctantly. "She's not going to take this well. She was so convinced she was protecting me." "She was protecting her own prejudices," Sarah said bluntly. "She wanted to find fault with Rebecca, so she manufactured a crisis to justify her existing disapproval." As we prepared to leave the cafe, Marcus pulled me aside. "Rebecca, I know I can't undo the damage I've caused. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough, but I want to try to rebuild what we had." I looked at my husband, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. The man who had loved me, married me, built a life with me. The man who had also been willing to believe the worst about me based on his mother's paranoid fantasies. "It's going to take time," I said honestly. "Trust, once broken, doesn't repair overnight. You didn't just question my fidelity, Marcus. You questioned my character, my integrity, my judgment. That cuts deeper than just suspecting an affair." "I understand," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes. Starting with your mother," I said firmly. "This ends now. No more surveillance, no more accusations, no more undermining our marriage. If she can't accept that she was wrong and treat me with respect, then she doesn't get to be part of our lives." Marcus nodded, though I could see the conflict in his eyes. Choosing between his wife and his mother wasn't easy, but it was necessary. 2 weeks later, we gathered at Marcus's parents' house for what would become known in family lore as the reckoning. Marcus had called a family meeting, ostensibly to clear the air about Thanksgiving dinner, but really to present the security footage evidence to his mother. Patricia sat in her favorite armchair, her expression defiant even before Marcus began speaking. She'd clearly convinced herself that any evidence contradicting her accusations must be fabricated or misinterpreted.
"Mom," Marcus began, "I need to show you something. We obtained security footage from Cafe Luna covering both dates when you saw Rebecca and Jake together." Patricia's confidence wavered slightly, but she maintained her defensive posture. "Security footage can be edited, Marcus. People manipulate evidence all the time."
This footage comes with authentication documentation, Marcus replied, setting up his laptop. It's time-stamped and verified by the cafe's security company. For the next hour, Patricia watched the same footage we'd reviewed at the cafe. Her expression gradually shifted from defiance to confusion to something approaching embarrassment. By the time the second meeting finished playing, her earlier certainty had completely evaporated. "I don't understand," she said quietly. It looked so different from where I was sitting. The way they were leaning toward each other, the intensity of their interaction. "You saw what you expected to see," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "You've never approved of my career focus, my independence, my partnership with Jake. When you witnessed our business meetings, you interpreted them through the lens of your existing disapproval." Patricia's face flushed with a mixture of shame and residual defiance. "I was trying to protect my son." "You were trying to destroy his marriage. You nearly succeeded," Sarah said sharply. The confrontation that followed was uncomfortable, but necessary. Patricia was forced to acknowledge that her accusations had been based on misinterpretation and bias rather than evidence. She apologized, though her apology felt more obligatory than heartfelt. Marcus, to his credit, stood by the conclusions we'd drawn from the security footage. He didn't try to excuse his mother's behavior or minimize the damage she had caused. For the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I felt like he was truly on my side. The aftermath of the reckoning was complex. Patricia and I maintained a civil but distant relationship. She never again questioned my fidelity, but she also never fully accepted responsibility for the chaos she created. Marcus and I began couples counseling with a different therapist, one who specialized in rebuilding trust rather than assuming guilt. Jake and I successfully managed the Davidson Industries account, which became our most profitable client relationship. The Peterson account, after some initial awkwardness, renewed their contract based on our continued professional excellence. But the most important outcome was the lesson I learned about standing up for truth in the face of false accusations. I'd spent weeks trying to accommodate other people's unfounded suspicions, compromising my confidence and questioning my own judgment. The security cameras at Cafe Luna captured more than just innocent business meetings. They captured the moment when truth triumphed over suspicion, when evidence overcame accusation, and when a marriage survived the ultimate test of trust. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.